In this talk, I'm going to present you increased prevalence of allergic, autoimmune, and neuropsychiatric diseases since 1960s, in line with the developments in epithelial barrier theory. So we were asking when we were assistants, why are the prevalence of allergic diseases and asthma increasing? That's very important, of course, because there was no such thing happening in our knowledge at that time. But the prevalence of allergies and asthma were very significantly increasing. And then why are there new type 2 inflammatory diseases developing? This was another important point. And in many developing countries, there was not much eosinophilic CRS, for example, very few cases. Then it started to increase. And eosinophilic esophagitis was not written in our textbooks. The first series was done in our, published from our institute by Hans-Uwe Simon and Alex Straumann. And then we now talk about 40, 50 million cases of eosinophilic esophagitis, a disease which was not existing at all. Another interesting example is from the chronic autoimmune diseases and chronic neuropsychiatric diseases. And the increases were happening at that time also in neuropsychiatric diseases. Chronic depression was increasing. Autism, the increase in autism was very impressive because in 1990s, there was no such disease mentioned in the books. When we were studying medicine, we were not learning autism. In about the year 2000, we first got the information that there is 1 in 33,000 in North America is a prevalence of autism. This was quite high and interesting. About 5 years ago, we learned that the prevalence of autism increased from 1 in 33,000 to 1 in 172 children. This was amazing. But last year, we learned that it increased to 1 in 33 children. So this is a big change and what was happening in autoimmune and neuropsychiatric diseases. So here we see the timelines of major milestones in allergic diseases related to this increase. John Bostock published the first case. Charles Blackley published the first series of 28 cases of hay fever or hay asthma in his book. He calls them both. And it took him 3 years to collect these 28 cases. And at that time, in 1870s, lawmaking, house heating, increased grass pollen and ragweed exposure, and increased house dust mite exposure were the reasons for increasing prevalence of allergic diseases. But we come to 1960s, and the increase was not more than 1 or 2%. These diseases were existing. One could publish a series, and one could make immunotherapies for grass pollen allergy, for hay fever. And we have a milestone time. Here is the addition of sodium lauryl sulfate, sodium dodecyl benzene sulfonate, and enzymes to household detergents and cleaners. This started in 1960s exactly. Within 4 years, we saw that there is amylase, lipase, several proteinases added to detergents to get rid of the stain. And then we, at the same time, we were first seeing that increased hospitalization because of asthma started in the UK. So there was very interestingly rising incidence of asthma in soldiers. But these are soldiers coming from inner cities, not from the countryside. In 1985, there was a publication about increased hospital admission of children with asthma in Australia, UK, New Zealand, Canada, and USA. And these were the capital cities and the big cities of these countries. Then we have reunification of Germany. And in 1989, East Germany had a prevalence of asthma and atopic dermatitis, 1 and 1.5% of the people. But within 10 years, in around 2000, this prevalence in East Germany increased up to the levels of West Germany, and this was about 10%. So these very high prevalences were quite exciting to see. And then we are seeing here at the same time increased prevalence of allergic diseases, but metabolic conditions, diabetes and obesity in industrialized countries, and neuropsychiatric conditions increased. Then we have a second curve, and the second curve is mostly related to additives in emulsifiers in processed food. That's what we think. But the second curve starts around the year 2000. And this is increased prevalence of food allergy, peanut butter sensitization and anaphylaxis, eosinophilic esophagitis. Peanut butter anaphylaxis was first reported in 2003. And then eosinophilic esophagitis was first reported in 1996. And then these diseases started to increase to high levels. We can say that currently about 9% of the population in North America and Northern Europe has food allergy, and peanut butter allergy is still on the rise. But it is not peanut allergy. You know, there's no peanut allergy in China, in Israel, in Turkey. When people just eat roasted peanut or very fresh peanut, and nothing happens. The allergy is related to peanut butter and additives in peanut butter, most probably. And we are going to come up with a great paper in this area soon. And eosinophilic esophagitis with almost no disease increased to very significant amounts. So in the meantime, chronic non-communicable diseases overall were 20 to 30 million patients in 1960s, which increased to around 2 billion patients with 100 times increase. Then we have an interesting curve. This black curve is the increased prevalence of allergies and chronic non-communicable diseases, autoimmune and neuropsychiatric diseases in China, in India, in developing countries, in several countries in Africa. It is something like that, starting from the year 2000 and showing a very substantial increase in these developing countries. So after seeing these curves, we are now facing a big damage with micro and nanoplastics, and micro and nanoplastics are everywhere. I will specifically talk about it in another section, but I can shortly tell you that with increased sensitivity of the methods by using atomic force microscopy and infrared spectroscopy, it was possible to detect micro and nanoplastics in the range of 10 nanograms. Before, the detection range was around 1 microgram, and many PET bottles and plastic containing substances had a report that it doesn't have plastic. But with the sensitive method, now we are seeing that plastic is in the brain, in testes, in ovary, in pericardial fluid, in the lungs, in the intestines. Plastics is everywhere in human bodies, but also in animals. So what happened after 1960s to initiate this global health crisis from 20, 30 million patients to 2 billion patients? What we think is it is linked to the chemistry revolution, which was started in 1950s, and after 1960s, 350,000 new substances have been introduced to animal and human lives, with almost no control on their health effects after 1960s. There's an interesting publication you can see here, Wang et al. Has published Toward a Global Understanding of Chemical Pollution, a first comprehensive analysis of national and regional chemical inventories. So there's 19 inventory here, and in these inventories, they are saying that there is around 350,000 new substances. And interestingly, 120,000 of these substances are not appropriately reported. We don't see the names of them, when we don't see the formulas of them, and many of them ended up as pollutants, or they are ended up in our daily life. I have the original book of Charles Blackley, and this is catarrh cestus, hay fever or hay asthma. It is published in 1873. And in the book, he starts the first chapter, introduction, with this sentence: "At no period in the history of medicine has the investigation of the causes of disease been carried on more assiduously than it is at the present day." A very interesting starting sentence of the book in 1873. And I think it's the same now. We are doing multi-omics, and we are doing very detailed analysis, and we can currently look at almost everything. We can look at more than 5,200 proteins at once in a semi-quantitative way. We can do transcriptome in the range of 20,000 genes. So these are so exciting research times for us, and we can knock down or knock in all of them in many models. So this is in about 150 years ago, Charles Blackley was thinking that it was like that. It was so busy, and there was so good research in the area, and that was in his book. And here are pollen grain counting, starting from May and to August, and the peak time he has identified as 28th of June. And this was done by microscopical counting of pollen grains. But it's really a great thing what he did and what he published in his book. And by chance, when I looked at this book, I saw in it a real prescription from Dr. Blackley. So I think I have his own book, and here's a cough syrup that contains many substances related to bring the lungs into a healthy status, and signed by Dr. Blackley. That's what I think. And I stop here, and thank you for your attention.